We're talking draft leagues, and specifically on today's episode, we're talking Keeper League and the top 20 Keeper League rankings. Let's go!
Hodge has done it from nowhere. Lifting the goal from inside the field. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Oh, yeah! Yes! You're a magician. Petrarca. The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. And today we are talking some draft content again. And today I'm switching it up from redraft content, and we're going to talk about Keeper League rankings or Dynasty League rankings. I think the top 20 can apply to both. Obviously, there's differences, in the back end of your roster and what happens there. But I think when it comes to keeper leagues, you can talk about the top 20. I don't think it changes too much. Although in a dynasty, maybe you do prioritize those really young players a little bit more than in a keeper league where you're only keeping, say, half your roster. So I haven't talked about keeper leagues on this podcast before, I don't think. I don't have as much experience in keepers as I do in dynasty. Of course, those of you who know me know I did a lot of content for fantasy basketball. And in fantasy basketball, the concept of a keeper league, I think, is less common than a full-on dynasty league, where in AFL it seems to be the reverse. The keeper league seems to be the more popular format, where obviously you keep a nominated amount of players year over year and then do a redraft for the remaining pool of players, whereas in a dynasty you keep everybody. You only have a rookie draft every season. So before we get into the top 20 players, I guess just go over my initial philosophy when it comes to keeper leagues. The reason that I think it differs is obviously every single year you have a chance to redraft a certain number of your players. So the value of the really young players that haven't proven too much, especially namely the rookies, I think in a lot of cases get overinflated when it comes to keeper leagues, because with the chance to redraft a team every single year, you have a chance to compete for the championship, compete for the premiership, and a lot of the times, I can't remember the lifespan, especially in basketball, the lifespan I read somewhere of the average dynasty league is something like 3 to 5 years. So a lot of the times leagues will dissolve, and there's a lot of value to going after just getting the win in the first couple of seasons. However, what we do know in fantasy footy is that just because you're an older player doesn't make you better than the younger players. So in the top 20, there's this mix of perfect value where you can get a player who's performing at an extremely high level right now, but is still at a very young age. And that, I think, is the type of player that you want to build your keeper league around. A player that is competing at the top of their line, but they're 21, 22, 23, 24 years of age. They're just as good as the players in their sort of late 20s, but you're going to get an extra 3, 4, 5 years out of them. So that's the sweet spot for me. Rather than trying to hunt for the 19, 20-year-olds that might break out and might become excellent, good players in the future, you can get the blend of production and youth at the same time with these players early on. And so that's where a lot of my early draft strategy would come into when it comes to keeper leagues. So in this top 20 list, you won't see any rookies in my top 20. You will not see very many second-year players. In fact, I think you'll only see one second-year player in this list. And only a handful of third-year players. A lot of these guys on the list have been playing for a little bit, but they are still very young, and they have proven success. And I think that I'm pretty confident to say their success and production is going to continue for a number of years. I don't like to, when I'm talking keepers, think about 5 years in the future. I want to think about the next 3 to 5 years. I'm not worried about 10 years in the future. I want to think about, all right, can I maybe win 2 out of the next 4 championships or something like that, and make sure that I'm able to have sustained success. So that's at least my approach. Let's get into the rankings without any further waffling on. We're going to go straight to number 1. And again, last little thing. Keeper league rankings as opposed to redraft rankings, I do think there's much more room for subjectivity. It is extremely difficult to project a performance over one season, let alone multiple seasons. Are you a team that's going to be competing now, building for the future, somewhere in between, like I said at the start? That makes it a very difficult task to do. So, a lot of these players, I think, compared to my redraft where I try to lean heavily on the numbers and things like that for what I expect to happen in this season, there's a little bit more subjectivity in this list. So let's have a look here. Number 1, I have Nic Daicos at number 1. I personally think that he is a top 3 player in the AFL. I think that he is an outstanding AFL fantasy build to his game. He could get the ball like no one else's business. He transformed his game last season from an outside player who's started his career coming off halfback to a true contested beast. He could do with a little bit more tackling, but I think is just the player over the next 5 to 10 years that I think is just going to be consistently very high up the top of the rankings. Despite being the predominant tag target at Collingwood, I think he's going to get better and better at handling that. He's just an extremely exciting player in my point of view, which gets you points for keeper and draft leagues. For me, I think that's an element that I don't want to undersell. If your player is very fun to watch and an exciting young player, I think that's massive, massive points. So despite him maybe being a little bit further down in my redraft rankings for this season, I just think that he is the most bankable fantasy star over the next 5 to 6 years, bar none. I think the guy at number 2 could push him for his money, but the other thing about this player, and when you're talking about these superstars, is a team going to change around them, and is the change around them going to affect their scoring over the next couple of years? We've already seen Nic Daicos be the number 1 player on a premiership winning team. So the success is there. Some of these players, like the guy we're going to talk at number 2, you've yet to see their team be successful. So as the team improves, as the team gets better, does it detract from their scoring? That is a variable that I don't think we have with Nic Daicos. He is a proven fantasy star. He's a proven fantasy star on a good team. And I think that makes him just the most dependable fantasy option for a number of years. So he is at number 1. Number 2, and probably a legit contender for number 1, is the clone of Nic Daicos, the North Melbourne version, Harry Sheezel. Now, he is a guy, like I said, in his first 2 seasons, he's breaking records. Last season, 112 average in his second year. I'm not sure, without going and deep diving into the history books, I don't know if that's ever been done before. That might be the highest second year average I think we've seen. I could be wrong, but it's definitely rarefied air, if nothing else. Like I said, that the tiebreaker for me is the fact that he plays for North Melbourne, and we haven't seen North Melbourne be good yet with him being the number 1 guy. He's also played, obviously, he's coming into the midfield. Can he make the same transformation that Nic Daicos made in his previous season and be that contested winning player and still score well with that type of a game style? We're yet to see it. I think that just based on how young he is, how much he's proven already, you can't have him outside your top 3. I think that there's no world in which he doesn't go a top 3 draft pick in a keeper league startup draft. And he should be considered the highest. And he also still has defender status. So that's another thing. I'm worried a little bit less about the positions, especially for those players that I don't expect to keep them. So I would fully expect after this season, he is a midfielder. So I would be drafting him as that in mind. So I'm not necessarily banking on the fact that, okay, this first season you're going to get Sheezel as a defender. So maybe that puts him above Nic Daicos. I mean, you could make that argument, but I think when I'm looking at that first pick, especially, I want that player that year in, year out is going to be dependable, top of their line. And so for Sheezel, that's going to be as a mid, at least how I foresee it. So I'm going to compare him against other mids. So, I mean, he comes at a number 2. He's an extraordinary player. We know how good he is. The only question for me that doesn't get him to number 1 is, what does the team look like? What does his scoring look like when North Melbourne is maybe competing for finals? And obviously we haven't seen that yet, which just pushed him a little bit down below Nic Daicos. Number 3 is I saw some tweets earlier about the consensus top 3. So I think this is maybe a little bit outside of consensus, but it's not far left field. I have Errol Gulden coming in at number 3. It is still surprising. Obviously, he broke out 2 years ago. He is still only 22 years old. Extremely young still in his career. And the thing I love about Errol Gulden is the fact that he can score despite a number of roles. Now, sometimes in a single season, that can be a little bit scary because you want them to compete in the top echelon of players. You usually need them to be an inside mid. And Gulden isn't an exception when it comes to the fact that he does score better when he plays more inside midfield time. So last season, when he averaged more than 40% CBAs, he averaged 113.5. When he averaged less, he averaged 107.5. But averaging 107.5 on less than 40% CBAs is incredible. So to me, that gives you an element of safety, just that whilst there is a little bit of potential for his role to fluctuate inside versus outside, the safety of him being able to score in either one of those roles is very, very reassuring. His time on ground just covers that, gives you that safety blanket to protect you from maybe a lower points per minute role on the wing. He's just able to stay out there, and you just watch him play, and you can see that this guy just is as thirsty as they come. He hunts the football like not many other players can. So for that reason, again, we've seen him in a team like the Sydney Swans, who are competing for premierships, playing really high-quality football, and he is a huge contributor to that success. We've seen him playing along other really good fantasy players like Isaac Heaney, like Callum Mills. He's played along those players and still gets his. To me, that bodes a lot of confidence to pick him really high up in Keeper League drafts, because I'm not worried about him dropping down based on other things that might potentially come over to the Swans. Which is why he's ahead of this next guy, which I think a lot of you might be wondering, where is the X-Man? And here he is at number 4. Tristan Xerri comes in at number 4. And the reason he's not in the top 3 is, again, that factor that I talked about with Harry Sheezel. And particularly when it comes to rucks. Rucks in premiership winning sides are typically not the highest fantasy producing players. Maybe outside of Max Gorn when they won a few years ago. And even then, they had a dual ruck set up at the time. It is just more likely to see a ruck contribute less in a winning fantasy team. And we would expect North Melbourne over the next few years, we'd hope for North fans' sake that North Melbourne improve and they get a better side and have better results. So that's my hesitation with him putting him up there with those 3 midfielders. But he is the highest ranked ruckman. Obviously, I think he has potential to go 120 potentially this season. So you might get the biggest return straight away. But there's also, I just think, ruckmen are never, in my opinion, the key to an actual AFL team doing well. It is those midfielders. It is those mid-forwards. It is the ball users. And as a team evolves, those guys will continue to get prioritized over a ruckman. With that being said, Tristan Xerri is, I think, just the prototypical type of ruckman you want to score fantasy points. The contested beast. He tackles, and I think those tackling numbers are sustainable year over year. There's no immediate threat to him being a dual ruck setup or anything like that. All those boxes are ticked very nicely for him. So he is at number 4. Number 5 is the oldest player so far on this list at 25 years old, Andrew Brayshaw. I just think that he is just one of the most bankable 110 plus players year over year. You've got other players on his team. They're going to take the attention away from him, and he is left free to roam and do his thing. So I still think you're going to get... I can see Andrew Brayshaw being the next version of Zach Merritt. You know, Zach Merritt just being that consistent year after year after year, always gets it done. I think Brayshaw can be that guy. Maybe he's not ever the guy that is the 120 and has that really big pop season, but I think that he is the player that you look back, in 5 to 6 years' time, and you're going to just see 110, 110, 110, maybe 105, 112, 107, 109. He's just always going to be there. And I think that that's just going to really bode well for your Keeper League team to have that bankable star. So a little bit older than these other guys, but again, he's 25. When we're talking about can you compete for a premiership for the next 5 years in a Keeper League, I think Andrew Brayshaw will be basically a first or early second round redraft selection in AFL Fantasy for that time. So to me, that is very much worthy of a top 5 selection in a keeper draft. The next guy here is a guy that maybe I've been on the record to being a little bit lower than in consensus, but I can't deny the fact that he's a gun, he's young, and I think he is going to remain in that sort of level for a number of years. And that is Tom Green. So I have Tom Green at number 6. Whilst I don't necessarily, similar to a Brayshaw, I don't know if I see the 115 to 120 type bracket of scoring. I do see the fact that he is going to be a very, very consistent number 1 player for his own team, the GWS Giants, that don't really have anyone to come through and supplant him as the number 1 guy. I just see him as a player that 24 years old, can average between that 105, 111 range for the next 6 years. And I think that that's extremely valuable to have. He might not ever be the number 1 scorer in the competition, but he always is going to, I think, be in sort of that top 10 sort of discussion there. So to me, that is extremely valuable to have. No threat on his role, no threat on his scoring floor that I can foresee coming through at GWS. So whilst I might be a little bit lower on him, and I'm not even that much lower than him in redraft leagues, it just sometimes I think people get a little bit ahead on these young players in the short term. In the long term, I'm all about Tom Green, and I think he is going to just be a bankable 105 to 111 sort of a player. So that to me gets him at number 6. Number 7 is one of my personal favorites, and that is Zach Butters. This is... I play in one keeper league at the moment, and he was one of the first players I picked. It was actually an auction draft, and I got him fairly cheap. He was one of the first players that kind of got thrown out there, and we were kind of still sussing out the value of players. And I was very happy to get Zach Butters. I think it was under $60 in that competition. But I think that he is just a superstar. He probably is better than some of the players before him on this list, and for that reason, he gets a little bit more attention than your Brayshaws, and potentially, who else did I have in front? I can't remember now. A little bit more attention, obviously your Ruckmans and things like that, and a bit more attention than Errol Gulden, who's a bit more of an outside player. So that kind of slides him down a little bit. However, I think he's going to get better and better at dealing with that attention, and I just foresee him being an absolute superstar for many, many years. He's 24 years old, same age as Tom Green. So there's an argument that I could put him above a Tom Green. I just think that maybe he's a little bit more taggable, a little bit more, you can put a bit more attention in and it be a more effective, affect his fantasy score more than a Tom Green. Hence why I've got Tom Green a little bit higher above. But I think you're really splitting hairs between those two players in terms of a ranking. Like I said, there's much more subjectivity in this type of a ranking compared to a single season. If you like Zach Butters more, I would have no issue picking him a couple spots higher, as I wouldn't with the next player in Caleb Serong. Teammate to Brayshaw, who I have higher, but I think a year younger. Am I right in saying that? A year younger, yes, in Caleb Serong. He went 108 the year before last, 104 basically the year before. So again, probably not that guy that's going to go 120, maybe not 110, but between 104 and 110, somewhere in that range for 6-7 years, I think is what Caleb Serong is going to be. And the thing I love about Caleb Serong, he has had a lot of attention go his way. He's had tag games, and he is probably one of the better young players at fighting through those. Despite him not being a huge Clayton Oliver type player, he's a smaller guy, that Lockie Neal's kind of body shape. But he has an ability to fight through tags, especially considering how young he is. And I really like that as a floor protector for Caleb Serong. And if he can start to string together a few of those more 160s, which we saw in the first round of last year, there is an argument that he comes up and has some 110 plus seasons. And then the floor is very, very solid. Like, I think at 100 floor, his last year is probably about as bad as it's going to get over the next 3 to 5 years, just because of him improving as he gets older, getting more used to that attention. Fremantle hopefully getting better right into those final mixes. I think that he is a fairly safe pick in the top 10. Maybe not quite the upside of some of those other guys before him, which is obviously why he's here and not higher. But just really bankable 24-year-old midfield. I think he's going to be there for many years. Similar kind of thing for this next player in Sam Walsh. You can kind of start to see a theme of these kind of players, which, they're not going to be top of their line maybe this year, although some of the ones at the top might be, but they're going to just be there for many, many years. Sam Walsh, same age as Tom Green, Caleb Serong, Zach Butters, all these guys are 24. Sam Walsh is in that same bracket as well. He's had a 109 season last year. He was a 106 guy. Maybe has potential to go 110 plus, but we don't need him to, I think, at this point. I mean, if he ever has that uninterrupted preseason, that would be awesome. Please stay healthy in the preseason, Sam Walsh. And probably the reason he's behind some of those guys because of those injury concerns starting to just mount up. A few little things here and there, backs and hamstrings. So he just falls behind them in like a bit of a tier, probably from Tom Green to Sam Walsh. Maybe Andrew Brayshaw to Sam Walsh, that kind of bracket of players. He just falls to the back because he's had a few more injury concerns than a lot of those other guys. So that's probably the only tiebreaker. I still think he has pretty much equal potential. I wonder what he will look like as Patrick Cripps starts to maybe age out of the number one player. You've also got maybe like a Jagger Smith coming along. So there's a few more threats, I think, to his scoring potential compared to some of the others. But he's a gun. He's one of my favorite players to watch. He never gives up. He's got that Andrew Brayshaw about him where he goes in hard, he tackles. Like his tackling last season was outstanding. Where he actually can improve is getting more marks, which was kind of how he came into the AFL as that outside gut running type player, racking up the marks. So he has that in him. And if he blends the two together, I think he could have some big seasons. Now we're going to go away from some of the midfielders. So we had Tristan, Xerri, and a bunch of mids in that range. These next two players, or next three players, what have I got here? Oh, I've missed someone out, actually. You know what I've done? I've got the wrong image here. So bear with me while I fix this one up. Because the next player is, the final midfielder of this bracket. And probably the guy that hasn't done it yet, but I think he is going to get there eventually. As we swap that image around before I bring it on screen. And it is Noah Anderson. Now, Noah Anderson, we saw last year what he does in wins versus what he does in losses. And you would hope, especially for the fans, that this is going to be something that continues in a positive trajectory for the Suns. So I see what's happened here. Okay. Let's bring that one back. And we'll bring Noah Anderson back on screen. Yes, so Noah Anderson is there. So at number 10, he hasn't done it yet. I think his best season was last year where he went 103, 104. But I can definitely see a world where he has that Sam Walsh ability to go that 109, 110 potentially. He's a high CBA, high time on ground midfielder. He started from a wing, came into the inside. I really like those types of players because often wingers know how to find space. They know how to lead for marks. And as they go inside, they get better at that tackle and inside contested game. And I think Noah Anderson's going to continue to do that. And I think as the team around him improves, he's going to reap the reward and the benefit of that. So I could see him being maybe valued a little bit lower than some of these other guys in your usual drafts. He might not go this high, and I think the number 10 ranking might, for some, feel a little bullish. But I do see some high upside for a player like Noah Anderson. And whilst we haven't necessarily seen that 110 season yet, I think it is there for him. So I'm going to sort out this image thing because we need to get the next guy here. I've already spoiled it because he is the next player on my list. And like I said, this is where we go away from the midfielders and we start to look at some other guys who are in different positions. Like I said before, when I talk about positions, I'm not too worried about the position if I think they're going to change in the short term. But at number 11, I have Wanganeen-Milera, which again, I think might be a little bit higher than consensus. He was another player that in this keeper league that I drafted in last season, I did snag him up, and I specifically targeted Wanganeen-Milera because I think that, well, first of all, He's 22 years of age, and he's already had 2 seasons in the 90s. The second half of the first of those seasons, he basically went 97 to 99. Last year, he went 98. So at such a young age, he's already very much a bona fide premium in his line. And I just see him compared to players which may or may not appear in the countdown here. Harry Sheezel, Sam Flanders, Nic Martin, those types of players, Max Holmes as well. Those players have a much higher likelihood of losing that defender status, in my opinion, and joining the crop of midfields. Whereas I think Wanganeen-Milera is a bona fide superstar in the halfback role. And I think that you are going to get basically a 100 averaging defender 7 to 8 years. And he's just so good at what he does. And I think it's that dependable and reliability on that position, which makes him essentially the number 1 defender to draft in keeper leagues. Now, I know I've got Harry Sheezel there, but like I said, he's going to be a midfielder next season. Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, to me, is the number 1 actual defender to draft in keeper leagues, because you know that he's going to be there and have those ranks the next season as well. And I think that there's a level of importance to that. And it is for that reason that I've got at number 12, and I know some people are going to disagree with this one, but at number 12, I have Dylan Moore. Now, of this top 20 list, he is by far the lowest averaging player. He averaged, 92 last year. And I could be someone you could consider a Dylan Moore enthusiast. I think he is the best player at Hawthorn. I think he's one of the best players in the competition. The position he plays is one of the most difficult positions in the game. Champion Data has considered Dylan Moore elite for the last 2 or 3 seasons, and I think that goes under the radar. To me, for him to score 90 plus consistently as a high half forward is extremely difficult to do. And if you're going to have a player in the forward line, most of our best forwards are not actually forwards. Year over year, we're going to have, for this year, it's going to be Bailey Smith, it's going to be Jack McRae, it's going to be Philippou, it's going to be Horn Francis, it's going to be Caleb Daniel, who's a defender. Last year, Zorko, Flanders, they were forwards for 1 season, but then they were actually defenders. So when you're talking about competing for multiple years, and if you want to actually have that legit dynasty in your league, you're going to have players that can be reliable in that position for multiple seasons. And Dylan Moore is going to be that player. The other thing is, if you're going to have a good forward line, chances are the year prior in a keeper league, you're going to have to take some bumps and bruises. Like, for the player to get forward status, they need to play forward. And usually, unless you're Dylan Moore, that's going to coincide with your player playing poorly, especially for that year that they are the midfielder. For example, you would only have Jack McRae in your keeper league if you held him from last year, and that would have been painful. Same with someone like Caleb Daniel. He's a forward this season. He's going to be a good forward this season, but you've had to ride the bumps and the bruises and hold a crap player in another line for that to pay off this 1 season. And it's going to be for 1 season, because next year he's going to be a defender. So I want to maybe avoid that and just have a player that I know is going to be maybe not the number 1 forward on any given year, but he's going to be consistently that top 5, top 6 forward player. And I'm never really going to have that season where I've got a player missing in action because he's playing a different position or something like that. He's not going to be one of those players that rides the line of that positional eligibility that you're really crossing your fingers, and it really determines the outcome of your season, whether or not he gets forward status or not year over year. You know he's going to be there. Hawthorn are only going to get better, and as they do get better, it's going to be a benefit to him. So Dylan Moore is someone I'm higher than on in most cases. I think he's a gun player. And yeah, I just think that the value of a forward that's going to stay a forward in a keeper league, in a dynasty league, I think is maybe not valued high enough across the community, at least from what I've seen. Let's talk about the first player who is going to come in as what I would call a player who's unproven yet, but I think a lot of us are projecting him to improve. And at number 13, I do have Will Ashcroft. So it's kind of his second year, although obviously last year, it is his third season, but last year he was robbed of a lot of it with that ACL injury. And he is coming off an average of, where have I got Ashcroft? I want to say he's coming off an average of 85-ish. Why can't I find him on my list here? Here he is. It's coming off an average of 85. Yep, average 85 last season. A lot of people are projecting him to make a jump. So I lied before when I said Dylan Moore was the lowest averaging player. Will Ashcroft is obviously a little bit lower than him as well. But he is someone that I could definitely foresee in the future. And this is the first kind of gamble pick, I think, that I've got on this list, where I think as early as this year, he can be a 100 averaging player. And then after that, he will join those guys that we had in the top 10, where I think he's going to have multiple seasons where he's going to be between 100 and 110. Now, there's a little bit of competition over at the Brisbane Lions with his brother, but Dunkley and Neil are getting a little bit older, so their midfield is kind of aging out a little bit at the perfect time for Will Ashcroft to kind of come on through. And he has that pedigree, man. He's got the perfect ability to, get tackles, get marks, rack up disposals. He can kick goals. He's going to be a really good player. I wouldn't be willing to go any earlier than this because there are those proven talents that are still in that prime age where you're going to get them for multiple years. But if you want that kind of, breakout pick, and it is exciting to pick the breakout the first year that they really pop. I mean, we've seen it already in patches, but for him to put it together for the whole season, Will Ashcroft is probably the number one guy for me at number 13. So he kind of starts this tier after the Dylan Moore, Nazai, Wanganeen-Milera. I feel like there's a bit of a tier drop off, and now you're starting to project a few things that may or may not come to pass. The next one here is Sam Flanders, who is a gun. He has played multiple positions in the last couple of seasons already. Killed it off halfback last year, but the expectation is this year he's going to move into the midfield and a mid-forward kind of a split. So I can see him averaging more than a Nazai Wanganeen-Milera. I just don't know where exactly he's going to settle into as a position for his career. Is he going to be enough of a forward split to get forward status? I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to bank on it. I want to bank on the fact that he's probably going to be a midfielder. And as a midfielder, I don't know if he's got that 110 potential, but I think he's more of a 100, 105 kind of a guy. But we forget, this guy is still super young. He is, in fact, only 23 years of age, so younger than your other players that we talked about in like a Brayshaw, a Butters, a Tom Green. He's a year younger than those guys, so plenty of room to improve just in any position that he's playing. So I think that it's fine to take him here. The next guy on this list is a similar kind of a story. I think I just back Sam Flanders as a player to score in multiple positions rather than just the one he had last season. Whereas this next guy, I've got a little bit more question marks with that. So he comes in at number 14. If I knew he was staying as a defender, he'd be right up there, maybe even cracking the top 10. Ahead of an Nazai Wanganeen-Milera, but the question marks on what position he's going to be year over year has him falling a little bit further back. Nic Martin is the next guy. Very similar kind of bracket to a Sam Flanders. He is a year older than Sam Flanders, but he averaged more than Flanders did last year. Actually, no, that's a lie. He averaged 1 point less, but very similar in terms of average. I have a little bit more of a question mark when it comes to where is he going to line up. Because I don't know if I see him as an inside mid. There's talks of him training as a mid. I don't know if I buy it just yet. So if he's going to play a bit more of that wing forward role, is it enough to get forward status? I don't know. There were some games last year which I think you don't want to rely on him kicking 4 goals in a game to put up big scores in that role. This is probably one of the riskier picks. In fact, the more I talk about it, the more I probably feel like I need to push him down a little bit more. If he'd stayed in that role that he had for the first half of the year, again, he'd be above someone like a Nazai Wanganeen-Milera. I just have those question marks year over year if he's going to maintain that. But one thing that is really, really safe with him, we're talking about Errol Gulden having high time on ground. This guy had higher time on ground than Errol Gulden did. He played 95% tog last season. And if you're doing that, I don't care where you're playing, you're going to be a premium in that line. You're going to be a really good player. So that bodes really well, just his fitness and how much he can stay out there on the field. Obviously, he's very important to the Bombers. So that at least provides a level of stability when the positional allocation for him year after year is a little bit up in question. We've got another ruck coming in at number 16, and I don't think it's the ruck that you're thinking of. It is, in fact, the Llama himself at number 16, Tim English. Now, last year, if we did this ranking list last season, I think Tim English would be a top maybe 3 player. Now, Tristan Xerri was not on our radar. I mean, a lot of us thought he was going to improve. I don't think anyone thought he'd be a top 5 keeper league player. Tim English was in that bracket. Now, he took a step back. He is 1 year older than Tristan Xerri. So we're talking about players in their prime age. Just one season ago, he was a 119 averaging player. So I think that sometimes we can swing too far the opposite way when a player has a poor year. Now, he often seems to have some injuries. There's the Sam Darcy question mark, because Sam Darcy is a very talented young player and a lot of concerns about him cutting into his role. I personally see Sam Darcy more as that key forward type. I think Tim English is more effective as a ruckman. He obviously does it a little bit more unconventionally to some other ruckmen in terms of he's not a big hit out to advantage guy, but he's like another midfielder in there. And I think the Dogs have wanted to play that way. He got, I believe, quote me, or don't quote me on this, double check me. I believe he got a big contract extension recently. So I'm quite comfortable drafting him here inside the top 20 as a guy who could potentially vault back up to a 120 averaging player. I think what he did last year is close to his floor. So I think he's going to settle somewhere in between that 104 to 110, 11, 12 type of player. I think the 119 is a little bit of an outlier. However, it is nice to know that he has that potential in him. And as a guy who just is so versatile as far as ruckmans go. And at 27 years old, you know, you compare to some of the other rucks who are dominating, they're, you know, at least 2 or 3 years older. So I think you've got more time with Tim English to be the star that he is. And I think his game will age pretty well as well, because he can do it all. The second lie I said earlier is that Ashcroft was the lowest averaging player. This is actually going to be the lowest averaging player, and it's probably the biggest gamble of this group. But Colby McKercher comes in at number 17. He is someone who I don't know what to expect yet. He's the only second-year player on this list. I think he's going to be the best of that draft class. Where does he settle in when it comes to position? I'm not 100% sure. If he's a half-back player, which I don't think is where he wants to be. If he's a half-back player, this could be a big value pick. I think he could be a 90s guy this season with the potential to follow that kind of Ashcroft trajectory and be 100 plus maybe in year 3 or 4. Exceptionally young. I think he's still 19. Let me double check. Age, he's just turned 20. So he's the youngest player on this list. It is a gamble. So by taking Colby McKercher this high, you are putting yourself, no, you don't have to be, but you are putting yourself maybe a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of immediate production. But I do still think because he has that defender status this year, there is a potential you're not sacrificing too much in the short term. And hopefully by next year, maybe if he isn't a defender, then he's going to improve in that position. Best case scenario, he keeps the defensive status this year, plays really well in this season, and then you've got another year where he can sort of be there. And by that time, he's a 100 plus averaging player anyway, and it's not that much of a drag. That's the good outcome scenario. There is an outcome where this year he moves more up into a wing, he loses defensive status, and because he's on a wing and not a halfback, he averages maybe high 80s instead of the 90s, and then you've got this high 80s averaging midfield only player who obviously will improve, but it's probably not worth this selection. So you've got a couple different ways that it could go. So an interesting player, and I think this is where you really do start to have to make decisions on, am I going down the path of I'm going to be young and maybe not compete this year, but maybe after this year in the next couple of seasons, or am I going to still try and win win the chocolates this year with my team. So I think he's a bit of a crossroads in that regard. As probably was this guy last season, but this season I just can't see him not working out this year. And obviously, I just Moz the man. Absolutely Moz City. But at number 18, Bailey Smith, who technically had an average of 0 last year, but he didn't play. He is in at number 18. Like I said, I don't love going off positions. He's going to be a forward this year. I have him projected the number 1 forward position. After the season, I think he's going to lose that forward status. But I do think he's going to fall within that bracket of being that 100 to 110 averaging player. You would have remembered a couple years ago, if you've been listening to podcasts for the last couple seasons, I was very bullish on Bailey Smith after coming off his 104 averaging year. I think at Geelong, he's going to finally get that chance to be that inside midfielder, which he is going to absolutely shine at. He's only ever done sort of roughly 50% CBAs. I know Geelong likes to put a lot of players through there, but they haven't had in the last several years, they haven't had the talent of a Bailey Smith on their team. And I think that is going to force their hand to maybe tighten their midfield rotation up, because this guy's going to be just so good. So at number 18, I think that this is a good spot to get a Bailey Smith. You could argue to get him above a Colby McKercher. I think you're going to get more instant reward. He is, in fact, only, how old is Bailey Smith? He's 24 years old. So right in that, bracket where he's only just entering his prime. The risk is he is coming off an ACL, obviously, and those ACL injuries increase your risk for other things like hamstrings and meniscuses and things like that. But I think the talent is there. The position, obviously, this season is there. So you're going to get a massive boost in that first year. And hopefully from then on, he could at least be 100 plus averaging mid at 24 years old. I think that's pretty solid at this spot. Finally, at number 19, and even here, I'm not too confident about it. Rowan Marshall comes in at number 19 as the highest averaging player on this list, because he was the highest averaging player last season. He's not 30 yet, and Ruckman, obviously, we think of them as, you put a little bit, they can go a little bit further into the age trajectory and still perform at a high level. See Max Gawn. So still, in his prime, 29 years old. The pelvis stress fracture scares me for this season. The fact that they continually try and get him playing more forward, even at the cost of putting in a Tom Campbell into your side, which to me that's desperation city right there. They've recruited this Harry Boyd guy, and I don't think he's going to supplant Rowan Marshall, but I do think it's going to eat into his ability to go 119 again this season. He's 2 years older than a Tim English, so I've got him behind a Tim English because those risk factors I think are a little bit more there. But with all of that said, even if he plays a bit more forward time, I still think this guy's an absolute fantasy superstar. He tackles, he marks, he gets disposals, he kicks goals. He's just one of the best fantasy players in the game, bar none, when he's in the right role. And even when he's not in the right role, he can still be decent. I just think that he's the oldest player. Yeah, he is the oldest player in this top 20. So the only player thus far over the age of... Well, Tim English was 27, Rowan Marshall 29. Everyone else was 25 or younger, or 26 or younger with Tristan Xerri. So the rucks are all a little bit older than all the mids, which you'd expect to see. But he is the oldest ruckman in my top 20 to make this list. So I'm not sure how this is going to be received. Let us know down in the comment section below if you'd have Rowan Marshall higher than number 19 in a keeper league draft. This is honestly about where I'd draft him in a redraft league at the moment for this season, because I am concerned about that pelvis stress fracture. There's a lot of risk associated with that type of injury, plus the added concern of bringing in a Harry Boyd and the evidence we've seen of them trying to push him a little bit more into that forward line in the past. The last player to round out this top 20 list is Jordan Dawson, one of my favorite players. Like what I mentioned with Nick Daicos, I think he's a top 3 player in the AFL today. He is, what is he? How old is Jordan Dawson? He's 28 years old, so fairly comfortably the oldest midfielder in this top 20 list. I think you've still got another 3 to 4 years of elite level production for Jordan Dawson. He has the potential, in my opinion, to be the number 1 scoring player in the game today. His versatility is concerning. However, he is just that good of a fantasy player that I think he'll score good regardless. he is just now, we're starting to get into that bracket where we're talking about, do you go super young? Do you go the slightly older? At 28, it's still okay. You've got some players who may be a little bit older that, you start to consider. So, other players that I haven't ranked on this list, Zach Merritt, 29, Jack Steele, 29, Josh Dunkley, 28. You've got Bontempelli, who's 29, who probably would have been number 21 on this list. I was kind of splitting between Dawson and him. I just see Dawson 1 year younger. You're going to get one more extra year of Dawson than you will with Bont. And fantasy-wise, I think they can score pretty similarly. I think Dawson maybe even has higher upside. So you're starting to get into those players who are, approaching 30 that, especially in a game like AFL, you can see a nosedive in production pretty quickly. So those are sort of the players. And then you start to think about, okay, am I going to go for some of these rookies? Am I going to go for these guys that maybe haven't quite done it yet? Or are young but not in that 100-plus bracket range. So like a LDU, he's 25 years old, but he's not averaged 100 for a fantasy season yet. So it's a bit early to take a player like that. Players like Matt Rowell, he's young, he's 23 years old, but again, hasn't averaged 100. It starts to become a little bit more of a difficult decision. You've got to start to make your decision. And I think that's league dependent on what you do in the first couple of rounds, depending on that. But this is my top 20 list, guys. Let us know if you want to see more Keeper League content. It is difficult from a content creator's point of view to make Keeper League content because the amount of variables out there, how many players are you keeping? What's the size of your league? Are you a rebuilding side? Are you a contending side? Are you in the middle? It's very difficult to give broad advice out there for keeper leagues, dynasty leagues in general. It's something that I've wanted to do in the basketball space a lot, but find it tough. And in footy, because the keeper element is even another added element of a variable, it's even harder still. But if you want me to give it my best, let me know down in the comments section below, and let me know how many keeper leagues are you in, and have you ever tried an auction draft keeper? It's obviously not offered by any of the platforms, but it was very fun last year. Shout out to the boys at the Grim Keepers because I thought that was a very enjoyable experience, and obviously allowed me to take away the championship last year. Little brag there for the Keeper League, the Grim Keepers there. But I am enjoying the league, and I'm keen to get back into it for Season 2 again. Let us know down in the comment section, guys. Again, what do you want to see from us this pre-season? We've got some more content coming your way. We're done with the pre-season position interviews and stuff like that. So now we're going to start to dive into some strategy and talk about the news coming up. But until next time, guys, make sure you subscribe to the Patreon as well. Almost forgot to plug that one in. Patreon.com/theballboys. You can go get that for $10 a month. Lots of good stuff there. We've done our first exclusive podcast on there. You've got our preseason projections. You've got the blueprint for the top 100. The projections can be easily used for your draft leagues. And you could even actually just go in there and buy the projections on their own. It's just $5 for the preseason projections, which are updated right up until round 1 this year. So I reckon that's insane value just on its own. If you don't care about Classic and you're just here for the draft stuff, just go get the preseason projections, use that for your draft rankings, $5, dominate your league, and get all the money back. That's what I would do. So until next time, guys, we'll see you later. Bye.
Hodge has done it from nowhere.